The crystal chandelier above the grand ballroom cast dancing shadows across the silk tablecloths as I adjusted my pearl-beaded veil one final time. The Riverside Manor had been my dream venue since I was 16, with its sweeping marble staircase and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson River. 300 guests filled the reception hall, their laughter mixing with the gentle notes from the string ensemble positioned near the terrace doors. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. I should have been floating on cloud nine. After all, I'd just married Ryan Mitchell, the man who'd held my hand through my father's cancer diagnosis, who'd stayed up until 3 in the morning helping me finish my master's thesis, who'd proposed during a sunrise hot air balloon ride over Napa Valley. The ceremony had been flawless. Even Great Aunt Dorothy had managed to stay awake through the entire service. But something felt off. Call it sisterly intuition, or maybe just years of living with someone who thrived on chaos, but every time I caught sight of my younger sister across the reception hall, my stomach tightened with an inexplicable dread. Chelsea had been acting strange for weeks. Not the usual pre-wedding stress that affects everyone in the family, but something darker, more calculating. She'd volunteered to handle the guest book arrangements, insisted on approving the seating chart, and even offered to coordinate with the photographers, all tasks she'd normally avoid like the plague. Chelsea wasn't the helpful type. She was the type who showed up late to family dinners with dramatic stories about her latest romantic disaster, expecting everyone to drop their conversations and focus entirely on her. The warning signs had been there all along, but I'd been too caught up in wedding planning to connect the dots. Like how she'd suddenly become interested in Ryan's work schedule, asking casual questions about his construction projects and which sites he'd be visiting. Or how she'd started showing up at our apartment unannounced, claiming she was in the neighborhood despite living 40 minutes away in downtown Albany. She'd linger in our living room, making small talk with Ryan while I finished getting ready for whatever dinner or movie we'd planned. "She's just excited about the wedding," Ryan had said when I mentioned Chelsea's newfound interest in our lives. "You know how she gets when she feels left out." I did know. Chelsea had always struggled with my achievements, though she disguised her resentment behind a mask of sisterly support. When I graduated summa cum laude from Syracuse, she'd made jokes about how book smart didn't mean life smart. When I got promoted to senior marketing director at Harrison & Associates, she'd commented that corporate jobs were soul-crushing. When Ryan proposed, she hugged me tight and whispered, "I hope you're not settling." But this felt different, more intense. During our final dress fitting 2 weeks ago, she stood behind me in the bridal shop mirror, her hands on my shoulders, and said something that had haunted me ever since. "You know, Allison, sometimes the people closest to us are the ones who can hurt us most. I hope you remember that." I'd laughed it off then, assuming it was just Chelsea being dramatic as usual. She'd always had a flair for the theatrical. Drama club in high school, community theater in college, and a series of jobs in event planning where her tendency toward melodrama was actually considered an asset. But now, watching her glide between tables in her dusty rose bridesmaid dress, stopping to chat with Ryan's college friends and my work colleagues, that comment felt less like general life philosophy and more like a threat. The reception was in full swing now. Uncle Frank was already loosening his tie and telling the same war stories he'd shared at every family gathering for the past decade. My college roommate Jessica was attempting to teach the groomsmen a complicated line dance she'd learned in Nashville. Ryan's mother was holding court at the head table, regaling anyone within earshot with tales of his Little League victories and science fair triumphs. I tried to lose myself in the celebration, to focus on the joy of the moment. Ryan looked impossibly handsome in his charcoal gray tuxedo, his dark hair slightly mussed from all the congratulatory hugs. When he smiled at me across the room, his green eyes crinkling at the corners the way they did when he was genuinely happy, I felt a surge of love so strong it almost knocked me over. This was supposed to be our day, our beginning, the start of the life we'd planned together in our cozy 2-bedroom apartment with its mismatched furniture and the herb garden Ryan had built for me on the fire escape. We'd talked about everything: kids in a few years, maybe a house in Saratoga Springs, definitely a golden retriever named Murphy. Simple dreams, but they were ours. The band finished their rendition of The Way You Look Tonight and transitioned into something more upbeat. Ryan made his way over to me, navigating around Cousin Martha's walker and dodging a particularly enthusiastic flower girl who was still scattering rose petals despite the ceremony being over for 2 hours. "Having fun, Mrs. Mitchell?" he asked, pulling me into another dance. The name still felt foreign on my tongue, but wonderfully so. Allison Mitchell. I'd practiced writing it in the margins of my work notebooks for months, feeling silly and giddy like a teenager with a crush. "The best day of my life," I told him, and I meant it. Despite the nagging worry about Chelsea, the stress of coordinating vendors and dealing with family drama, despite Aunt Dorothy's last-minute dietary restrictions that had sent the caterers into a panic, this day had exceeded every expectation. But even as we swayed to the music, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was building. Chelsea kept catching my eye from across the room, that same calculating look she'd worn as a child when she was planning some elaborate prank or scheme. She'd position herself in my line of sight, wait for me to notice her, then smile with a sweetness that didn't quite reach her eyes. Ryan's best man, Jake, approached the microphone for what should have been the final toast of the evening. He'd been Ryan's roommate at Sunny Buffalo, his business partner in their construction company, and the closest thing to a brother he'd ever had. Jake was reliable, steady, the kind of person who showed up early to help set up and stayed late to help clean up. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jake began, his voice carrying easily across the now quiet reception hall. "I've known Ryan Mitchell for 8 years, and I can honestly say I've never seen him happier than he is right now." Scattered applause and ahs from the crowd. Someone's baby started fussing, and I heard the gentle shushing of their mother trying to keep the noise down during the speech. "But before I embarrass him with stories about his bachelor party," Jake continued with a grin, "I think someone else would like to say a few words." My blood ran cold. This wasn't part of the plan. Jake was supposed to give his toast, we'd cut the cake, and then Ryan and I would make our grand exit under a shower of sparklers. No one else was scheduled to speak. Chelsea stood up from her seat at table 7, smoothing down her dress and walking toward the front of the room with the kind of confidence that came from years of commanding attention. The room fell silent, except for the gentle clink of silverware as servers continued clearing dessert plates. She looked radiant, I had to admit. The dusty rose color complemented her auburn hair perfectly, and the dress fit her like it had been custom-made. She'd always been the prettier sister, with her delicate features and natural grace. I was the studious one, the responsible one, the one who planned ahead and followed through. Chelsea was the one who lit up rooms and made people remember her name. "Thank you, Jake," she said, her voice carrying that slight southern lilt she'd picked up during her brief stint living in Charleston. "I hope you don't mind if I steal a moment." Jake looked confused but stepped aside, gesturing toward the microphone with an uncertain smile. The wedding planner, a stern woman named Patricia who'd coordinated hundreds of events, looked equally puzzled. This definitely wasn't on the timeline she'd given us that morning. Ryan squeezed my hand. "Did you know she was going to speak?" he whispered. I shook my head, my mouth suddenly dry. Every instinct I had was screaming that this was wrong, that whatever Chelsea was about to say would change everything. But I was trapped in my wedding dress, surrounded by our families and friends, with nowhere to run and no way to stop what was coming. Chelsea adjusted the microphone, her movements deliberate and rehearsed. She'd clearly planned this moment, thought it through, maybe even practiced in front of her bedroom mirror. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Whatever was about to happen, it wasn't spontaneous. It was calculated, orchestrated, designed for maximum impact. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she began, her smile bright and warm, giving no hint of the storm I could feel building. The words sounded normal, appropriate even, but I knew my sister. I knew the way her eyes glittered when she was about to drop a bombshell, the way her voice got just slightly higher when she was about to tell a lie that would hurt someone. And right now, every alarm bell in my head was ringing at maximum volume. Chelsea paused, letting her gaze sweep across the reception hall with the practiced timing of someone who understood how to work a crowd. The silence stretched, becoming uncomfortable. Forks stopped moving, conversations died mid-sentence. Even the servers froze in place, their hands still gripping water pitchers and wine bottles. "You know," she continued, her voice taking on that confessional tone that made people lean forward in their chairs. "Allison and I have always been close. Sisters share everything: clothes, makeup, secrets." She laughed, a sound that would have seemed natural to anyone who didn't know her as well as I did, but I heard the edge underneath, sharp and deliberate. Ryan's grip on my hand tightened. His construction-weathered palm was suddenly damp with sweat, and I could feel his wedding ring pressing against my fingers. He was sensing it too, that electric feeling in the air right before lightning strikes. "We've been through everything together," Chelsea went on, her eyes finding mine across the room. The smile on her face was radiant, but her gaze was cold, calculating. Murmurs of appreciation rippled through the crowd. Aunt Dorothy dabbed at her eyes with her lace handkerchief. Ryan's mother nodded approvingly from the hat table. Everyone was eating this up, the beautiful sister giving a heartfelt toast at the wedding. It was picture perfect, exactly the kind of moment that would end up in our wedding video. But my chest felt tight, like someone was slowly turning a vice around my ribs. Chelsea's rehearsed gestures, the way she was building up to something, the fact that she positioned herself perfectly under the main spotlight, none of this was accidental. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she began, her smile bright and warm, giving no hint of the storm I could feel building. "It means so much to see everyone celebrating Allison and Ryan's special day." The words sounded normal, appropriate even, but I knew my sister. I knew the way her eyes glittered when she was about to drop a bombshell, the way her voice got just slightly higher when she was about to tell a lie that would hurt someone. And right now, every alarm bell in my head was ringing at maximum volume. Chelsea paused, letting her gaze sweep across the reception hall with the practiced timing of someone who understood how to work a crowd. The silence stretched, becoming uncomfortable. Forks stopped moving, conversations died mid-sentence. Even the servers froze in place, their hands still gripping water pitchers and wine bottles. "You know," she continued, her voice taking on that confessional tone that made people lean forward in their chairs. "Allison and I have always been close. Sisters share everything: clothes, makeup, secrets." She laughed, a sound that would have seemed natural to anyone who didn't know her as well as I did, but I heard the edge underneath, sharp and deliberate. Ryan's grip on my hand tightened. His construction-weathered palm was suddenly damp with sweat, and I could feel his wedding ring pressing against my fingers. He was sensing it too, that electric feeling in the air right before lightning strikes. "We've been through everything together," Chelsea went on, her eyes finding mine across the room. The smile on her face was radiant, but her gaze was cold, calculating. Murmurs of appreciation rippled through the crowd. Aunt Dorothy dabbed at her eyes with her lace handkerchief. Ryan's mother nodded approvingly from the head table. Everyone was eating this up, the beautiful sister giving a heartfelt toast at the wedding. It was picture perfect, exactly the kind of moment that would end up in our wedding video. But my chest felt tight, like someone was slowly turning a vice around my ribs. Chelsea's rehearsed gestures, the way she was building up to something, the fact that she'd positioned herself perfectly under the main spotlight, none of this was accidental. "So when something this important happens in our family," she continued, placing her free hand over her stomach in a gesture so subtle that most people probably missed it, "I knew I had to share it with all of you tonight." My breath caught. No, she wouldn't. Not here, not now. But even as my brain rejected what was happening, I could see the truth written in the triumphant gleam in her eyes. This was exactly what she would do. This was peak Chelsea, stealing the spotlight at the moment when it mattered most, turning someone else's happiness into her own personal stage. "I have an announcement," she said, her voice rising slightly, carrying easily to the back corners of the ballroom. "Something that's going to change everything for our family." A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The room held its collective breath. Uncle Frank set down his bourbon. Jessica stopped mid-conversation with the groomsmen. Even the baby who'd been fussing earlier had gone quiet, as if sensing the gravity of whatever was about to happen. Chelsea's smile widened, and for a split second, I saw her as she truly was. Not my little sister, not the troubled girl who'd always felt overshadowed, but someone capable of real cruelty. Someone who could look at my happiness and decide to destroy it for her own satisfaction. "I'm pregnant," she announced, her voice ringing clear and bright across the suddenly silent reception hall. For a moment, the words seemed to hang in the air like soap bubbles, pretty and innocent and harmless. A few people started to clap, unsure but supportive. Cousin Martha smiled and raised her wine glass. Ryan's college buddy Tom let out a confused "congratulations." But Chelsea wasn't finished. She let the scattered applause die down, then lifted her chin with the kind of defiance I'd seen 1,000 times growing up, when she'd broken Mom's favorite vase, when she'd crashed Dad's car, when she'd been caught cheating on her SATs. "The father," she said, her voice cutting through the air like a blade, "is Ryan." The silence that followed was absolute. Not the comfortable quiet of a crowd listening to a speech, but the kind of shocked, breathless silence that follows a car accident or a natural disaster. The kind of silence where you can hear your own heartbeat thundering in your ears. Ryan dropped my hand like it was on fire. I felt him physically recoil, his entire body jerking backward as if Chelsea had slapped him across the face. "What?" he whispered. But the word carried in the acoustically perfect ballroom, reaching every corner where our friends and family sat frozen in disbelief. Chelsea nodded sympathetically, as if she understood how difficult this must be for him. "I know it's overwhelming, honey. It was for me too when I found out. But we can't keep pretending anymore, not when we're about to be a family." The room exploded. Gasps erupted from every table. Someone screamed. I think it was Ryan's mother. A wine glass shattered somewhere behind me, followed by the crash of a chair being knocked over. I heard my own mother's voice, sharp and horrified. "Chelsea Marie Thompson, what are you saying?" But through all the chaos, all I could focus on was Ryan's face. The color had drained from his skin, leaving him pale as the white roses in my bouquet. His green eyes were wide with shock, darting between me and Chelsea like he was trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. "Ryan?" My voice came out smaller than I'd intended, barely audible over the growing commotion around us. He turned to me, and I saw something I'd never seen in his face before. Not just confusion, but a flicker of doubt, as if he was actually considering whether this could be true. That flicker hit me harder than Chelsea's announcement, harder than the gasps and shouts and the sound of Uncle Frank demanding to know what the hell is going on here. The man I just promised to love and honor was looking at me like he wasn't sure if I was a victim or a conspirator. "I can explain," Ryan started, but his words were swallowed by the pandemonium erupting throughout the ballroom. My father had stood up so quickly that his chair toppled backward, his face red with rage and embarrassment. "This is unacceptable," he bellowed, his voice carrying the authority that had made him a successful trial attorney for 30 years. "Not at my daughter's wedding." But Chelsea just smiled serenely, like she was discussing the weather instead of detonating a nuclear bomb in the middle of my reception. "Daddy, I know this is hard to hear, but the truth always comes out eventually. I couldn't let Allison marry Ryan without knowing." "You're lying," I found my voice, standing up so fast that my chair scraped against the marble floor. My wedding dress felt suddenly heavy, the beadwork that had made me feel like a princess now weighing me down like armor. "Ryan would never." "Wouldn't he?" Chelsea interrupted, tilting her head with mock concern. "How well do you really know him, Allison? How many late nights did he say he was working? How many times did he have to cancel your dates because of emergencies on the job site?" Ryan's face went from pale to gray, because she was right. There had been late nights, canceled plans, times when he'd come home exhausted and distracted. I'd never questioned it because I trusted him, because construction work was unpredictable, because he'd never given me a reason to doubt. But now, with 300 pairs of eyes watching our marriage implode in real time, those innocent explanations felt naive. "Tell her, Ryan," Chelsea said gently, like she was coaxing a confession from a child who'd been caught stealing cookies. "Tell her about the nights we spent together. Tell her how you said you were unhappy, how you said you wished you could be with me instead." "That's not," Ryan started, then stopped, his mouth opening and closing like he couldn't find the words. And in that moment of hesitation, that split second where he failed to immediately deny her claims, I felt something inside my chest crack. Not break completely, not yet, but develop the kind of hairline fracture that would eventually shatter everything if put under enough pressure. The photographers were having a field day, their cameras clicking rapidly as they captured every moment of the disaster unfolding before them. The wedding planner was frantically whispering into her headset, probably calling security, or trying to figure out how to salvage a reception that had turned into a soap opera. My father had stood up so quickly that his chair toppled backward, his face red with rage and embarrassment. "This is unacceptable," he bellowed, his voice carrying the authority that had made him a successful trial attorney for 30 years. "Not at my daughter's wedding." But Chelsea just smiled serenely, like she was discussing the weather, instead of detonating a nuclear bomb in the middle of my reception. "Daddy, I know this is hard to hear, but the truth always comes out eventually. I couldn't let Allison marry Ryan without knowing." "You're lying," I found my voice, standing up so fast that my chair scraped against the marble floor. My wedding dress felt suddenly heavy, the beadwork that had made me feel like a princess now weighing me down like armor. "Ryan would never." "Wouldn't he?" Chelsea interrupted, tilting her head with mock concern. "How well do you really know him, Allison? How many late nights did he say he was working? How many times did he have to cancel your dates because of emergencies on the job site?" Ryan's face went from pale to gray, because she was right. There had been late nights, canceled plans, times when he'd come home exhausted and distracted. I'd never questioned it, because I trusted him, because construction work was unpredictable, because he'd never given me a reason to doubt. But now, with 300 pairs of eyes watching our marriage implode in real time, those innocent explanations felt naive. "Tell her, Ryan," Chelsea said gently, like she was coaxing a confession from a child who'd been caught stealing cookies. "Tell her about the nights we spent together. Tell her how you said you were unhappy, how you said you wished you could be with me instead." "That's not," Ryan started, then stopped, his mouth opening and closing like he couldn't find the words. And in that moment of hesitation, that split second where he failed to immediately deny her claims, I felt something inside my chest crack. Not break completely, not yet, but develop the kind of hairline fracture that would eventually shatter everything if put under enough pressure. The photographers were having a field day, their cameras clicking rapidly as they captured every moment of the disaster unfolding before them. The wedding planner was frantically whispering into her headset, probably calling security or trying to figure out how to salvage a reception that had turned into a soap opera. Through it all, Chelsea stood at the microphone like a conductor orchestrating chaos, her dusty rose dress catching the light as she watched her masterpiece unfold. She'd done it. She'd taken my perfect day and turned it into a nightmare that would haunt our family for years to come. And the worst part? She looked genuinely happy for the first time in months. The chaos around me felt distant, like I was watching it happen to someone else through thick glass. Voices blended into a cacophony of shock and outrage, my mother crying, Ryan's father demanding answers, wedding guests murmuring in scandalized whispers. But in the center of the storm, I found an unexpected calm. Maybe it was a shock. Maybe it was the adrenaline finally kicking in. Or maybe it was something deeper, a crystal clear moment of recognition where everything suddenly made perfect sense. I looked at Chelsea, still standing triumphantly at the microphone, and felt something shift inside me. Not the devastation she was expecting, not the tears or screaming or dramatic collapse that would have fed her need for chaos. Instead, I felt a strange sort of relief, like a fever finally breaking. Because I knew my sister. I'd known her for 26 years, had watched her lie her way out of countless situations, had seen her manipulate and scheme and twist reality to serve her purposes. And right now, standing in the spotlight she'd stolen, she was doing what she did best, creating a performance. But this time, I wasn't going to be her victim. Interesting timing, Chelsea, I said, my voice cutting through the noise with surprising steadiness. The microphone wasn't near me, but years of giving presentations at Harrison and Associates had taught me how to project my voice across a room. The crowd began to quiet, sensing that the bride was about to respond. Chelsea's confident smile faltered slightly. This wasn't the reaction she'd anticipated. I walked toward the front of the room, my heels clicking against the marble floor with measured precision. My dress trailed behind me like a white flag, but I wasn't surrendering. I was advancing. You know what the funny thing is? I continued, stopping just a few feet from where Chelsea stood frozen. I've been wondering for weeks why you've been acting so strange. The unexpected visits, the questions about Ryan's schedule, the sudden interest in our relationship. Ryan stepped forward, his face still pale, but his eyes now focused entirely on me. Allison, I swear to God, I never. I held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. I know, I said simply, and I realized I meant it, not because I was naive or in denial, but because I'd seen Ryan's genuine shock, his complete bewilderment at Chelsea's claims. You can't fake that kind of authentic confusion. Chelsea's grip on the microphone tightened. You don't understand, she said, her voice taking on a desperate edge. He's been lying to you for months. The late nights, the canceled dates. The late nights when he was at the construction site in Glens Falls, I interrupted, my voice growing stronger with each word. The job that ran 3 weeks over schedule because of weather delays. The same project I visited him at twice, where I met his entire crew and saw exactly what he was working on. A murmur rippled through the crowd. People were starting to listen now, starting to think instead of just reacting. The canceled dates, I continued, that happened when his business partner Jake got food poisoning and couldn't supervise the concrete pour for the Morrison House Foundation. Jake, who's sitting right there and probably remembers that weekend very clearly. Jake, still standing near the microphone stand, nodded emphatically. February 14th, he called out, worst Valentine's Day of my life. I was puking my guts out, and Ryan had to handle the poor solo, 12-hour day. Chelsea's face was beginning to flush, but she pressed on. You don't know everything about your precious husband. There are things... Oh, I'm sure there are things, I agreed, my tone almost conversational now. Like how he's been planning a surprise anniversary trip to Bermuda for next year. He asked Jake to help him research hotels because he knows I've always wanted to go there. Or like how he's been secretly taking cooking classes on Thursday nights because he wants to make me a proper anniversary dinner. Ryan's eyes widened. Those Thursday night poker games with the guys? I'd figured it out weeks ago when I'd smelled garlic and herbs on his clothes instead of beer and cigarettes. That's not, Chelsea started, but I wasn't finished. Or like how he's been working extra hours specifically to save money for the down payment on that house in Saratoga Springs, the one with the blue shutters and the wraparound porch that I fell in love with when we drove past it last month. The room had gone completely silent now. Even the servers had stopped moving, standing like statues with their trays balanced in their hands. I turned to face the crowd, my voice carrying easily across the ballroom. See, here's what my sister doesn't understand. When you're actually in love with someone, really, genuinely in love, you pay attention. You notice things. You know their schedules and their habits and their tells. Chelsea tried to interrupt again, but I talked over her. I know that Ryan bites his lower lip when he's nervous, like he's doing right now. I know he gets a crease between his eyebrows when he's confused, which appeared the second Chelsea started talking. And I know he unconsciously touches his wedding ring when he's stressed, which he's been doing continuously since this whole spectacle began. I was right. Ryan's thumb was rubbing against the gold band on his ring finger, a gesture I'd noticed during job interviews and difficult conversations with contractors. But most importantly, I said, my voice dropping to a more intimate level, I know my sister. Chelsea's face had gone from flushed to white. The confident mask was slipping, revealing something desperate and ugly underneath. I know that Chelsea has been jealous of every relationship I've ever had. I know she's never been able to stand seeing me happy. And I know that she's perfectly capable of fabricating an elaborate lie to ruin something good in my life. I'm not lying, Chelsea protested, but her voice cracked on the words. Prove it, I said simply. The challenge hung in the air between us. Chelsea's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Prove you're pregnant, I continued. Show us the test results. Give us the name of your doctor. Tell us when the baby is due. For the first time since this nightmare began, Chelsea looked genuinely rattled. It's early. Too early for what? For a doctor's appointment? For blood work? For any kind of medical confirmation? I shook my head. Chelsea, if you were actually pregnant with my husband's baby, don't you think you'd have some kind of proof to back up your claim before making it at my wedding? The logic was undeniable, and I could see it registering on faces throughout the crowd. What kind of person drops a bombshell like this without evidence? Ryan finally found his voice. I've never been alone with Chelsea, he said firmly, his words carrying clearly across the silent room. Not once in the entire time Allison and I have been together. Every interaction we've had has been in front of other people, family dinners, group gatherings, wedding planning meetings. That's not true, Chelsea said, but she was grasping now, her story falling apart in real time. Name one time, I challenged her. One specific instance when you and Ryan were alone together. Give us a date, a location, anything concrete. Chelsea's eyes darted around the room, looking for support that wasn't coming. Our parents sat at their table looking mortified. The wedding guests were watching her with a mixture of fascination and disgust. Even the photographers had stopped taking pictures, too engrossed in the drama to remember they had a job to do. This is ridiculous, she finally said, her voice shrill with desperation. I don't have to prove anything to you people. I know what happened. What you know, I said quietly, is that you couldn't stand seeing me happy. What you know is that you've spent your entire life trying to take things that belong to me. And what you know is that this time you went too far. The truth of it settled over the room like a heavy blanket. This wasn't about pregnancy or infidelity. This was about a sister who'd rather destroy than celebrate, who'd rather tear down than build up. But I wasn't done yet, not even close. I reached into the hidden pocket of my wedding dress, a detail the seamstress had added at my specific request, because I'd learned long ago that being prepared for Chelsea's chaos was a survival skill. My fingers closed around the small device I'd hoped I'd never have to use. You know what, Chelsea? I said, pulling out my phone and connecting it to the venue's sound system. Since we're sharing family secrets tonight, I think our guests deserve to hear the whole truth. The wedding planner, Patricia, looked like she was about to have a heart attack, but she didn't try to stop me. Even she could sense that this had moved far beyond normal wedding drama into something that needed to play out completely. Chelsea's eyes fixed on my phone with a growing alarm. What are you doing? Something I should have done months ago, I replied, navigating to my voice memo app. See, unlike you, I don't make accusations without evidence. The first recording began to play through the ballroom speakers, crystal clear and unmistakably Chelsea's voice. I swear, Mom, Allison thinks she's so perfect with her fancy job and her perfect boyfriend. Well, we'll see how perfect she feels when I'm done with her. My mother's gasp was audible across the room. The recording continued, with Mom's voice, tired and frustrated. Chelsea, what are you planning? Please tell me you're not going to do something destructive at your sister's wedding. I'm not planning anything, Chelsea's recorded voice replied with false innocence. I'm just saying that maybe it's time Allison learned that not everything in life comes easy. Some of us have to fight for what we want. I stopped the recording and looked directly at Chelsea. That was from 3 weeks ago, when you called Mom crying about how unfair your life was. Remember? You were upset because your roommate moved out and you couldn't afford the rent on your apartment. Chelsea's face had gone completely white. You recorded a private conversation with our mother? I recorded a conversation where you essentially threatened to ruin my wedding, I corrected. And that's just the beginning. I played the next clip. This one was from my security camera system, the doorbell camera Ryan had installed after a series of break-ins in our neighborhood. Chelsea's voice was muffled, but audible as she stood on our front porch 2 weeks earlier, talking on her phone, waiting for us to answer the door. Phase 1 is almost complete, she was saying. I've been documenting his schedule, taking photos when I visit them. Trust me, by the time I'm done, everyone will believe he's been cheating. Allison's going to be humiliated. The voice on the other end was harder to make out, but Chelsea's response was clear. Of course I feel bad about it. She's my sister, but she's had everything handed to her our entire lives. Perfect grades, perfect job, perfect relationship. It's time she experiences what the rest of us go through. The ballroom had fallen into that particular kind of silence that comes when people are witnessing something they know they'll remember forever. Uncle Frank had stopped drinking entirely, his bourbon glass forgotten on the table. Jessica was recording everything on her phone, probably already calculating how many views this would get on TikTok. Still think I'm making this up? I asked Chelsea, who was now gripping the microphone stand like it was the only thing keeping her upright. But I wasn't finished. The next recording was the most damning. A phone call I'd intercepted using an app Ryan had suggested when we'd been dealing with spam callers. Chelsea's voice was animated, excited, talking to someone whose responses I couldn't hear clearly. The pregnancy thing is genius, she was saying. Even if she doesn't believe it at first, the doubt will eat away at her. And making the announcement at the wedding, in front of everyone, she'll never recover from the humiliation. The unknown voice said something, and Chelsea laughed, a sound completely devoid of sisterly affection. Of course I'm not actually pregnant, you idiot. This is about destroying her perfect little life. She's always acted like she's better than me, like her success means I'm a failure. Well, let's see how successful she feels when her marriage is over before the honeymoon. The silence in the ballroom was deafening. I could hear the ice cubes melting in abandoned drinks, the whisper of silk and taffeta as people shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. I stopped the recording and looked around the room at the faces of our family and friends. Some looked shocked, others disgusted, but most just looked sad. Sad for me, sad for our parents, sad that they'd witnessed something this ugly and deliberate. There's more, I said quietly. Hours of recordings, actually. Chelsea planned this whole scheme, talking about how she was going to take Allison down a peg, discussing different ways to maximize the damage to my reputation and my marriage. Chelsea finally found her voice, though it came out as a croak. Those recordings are illegal. You can't. Actually, they're perfectly legal, interrupted a new voice from the back of the room. Everyone turned to see my friend Marcus Chen walking forward, dressed in his best suit, but carrying the unmistakable confidence of someone who knew exactly what he was talking about. Marcus was a criminal defense attorney, one of the best in Albany, and someone I'd called 3 days ago when I'd finally gathered enough evidence to confirm what I'd suspected for weeks. New York is a one-party consent state, Marcus explained to the room, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd argued cases in front of judges for 15 years. As long as one person in a conversation consents to recording, in this case, Allison's mother during the first call and Allison herself during the others, the recordings are completely admissible. He walked up to stand beside me, pulling out his own phone. But what's really interesting is what we discovered when we started looking into Chelsea's recent activities. I nodded at him to continue. Marcus and I had planned this contingency, hoping we'd never need it, but preparing for the worst-case scenario. Tell them about the fake social media accounts, I said. Marcus pulled up several screenshots on his phone, then connected it to the sound system to display them on the venue's large screens, the same screens that had shown our engagement photos during cocktail hour. Chelsea Thompson has been operating at least 4 fake Instagram and Facebook accounts over the past 2 months, Marcus announced, accounts specifically created to spread rumors about Ryan Mitchell's alleged infidelity. The screens showed profile after profile of fake accounts, with stock photo profile pictures, all posting variations of the same story. Sightings of Ryan with mysterious women, hints about his secret relationship, carefully cropped photos that made innocent interactions look suspicious. She's been building a narrative, Marcus continued, creating what's called a whisper campaign, designed to plant seeds of doubt about Ryan's faithfulness. The goal was to make tonight's announcement seem credible by laying groundwork that would make people think, oh, I did hear rumors about him cheating. Chelsea was backing away from the microphone now, her face a mask of panic and rage. This is insane. You're all insane. I was trying to help Allison see the truth about her precious husband. The truth? I stepped closer to her, my voice deadly calm. The truth is that you've spent 2 months of your life plotting to destroy mine. The truth is that you created an elaborate fantasy because you couldn't stand to see me happy. The truth is that you're not pregnant, you've never been alone with my husband, and this entire performance is nothing but the desperate act of someone who's so consumed with jealousy that she's willing to burn down her own family to feel better about herself. Chelsea's mask finally slipped completely. The tears that came weren't the graceful, sympathetic tears she'd probably planned to shed during her victim performance. These were ugly, angry tears of someone whose carefully constructed scheme had just been demolished in front of 300 witnesses. You think you're so smart, she spit, her voice raw with fury. You think you've won? This isn't over, Allison. I'll find another way to— No, I interrupted firmly. This is over. Tonight, tomorrow, and forever. Because I still had one more card to play. I reached into my bouquet and pulled out a small flash drive that I'd hidden among the white roses and baby's breath. The wedding planner had thought it was an odd request when I'd asked her to help me conceal it there, but Patricia had been in the business long enough to know that brides sometimes had to prepare for the unexpected. Marcus, would you mind showing everyone the financial records? I asked, handing him the drive. Marcus plugged it into his laptop and connected it to the projection system. What you're about to see, he announced to the stunned crowd, is 6 months of financial transactions that tell a very interesting story. The first document that appeared on screen was a bank statement from Chelsea's checking account. Red highlighted entries showed payments to various businesses. Digital Solutions LLC, $1,200. Photo enhancement services, $800. Social media marketing, $2,500. Chelsea has spent over $8,000 in the past 6 months on this campaign to destroy her sister's marriage, Marcus explained, scrolling through transaction after transaction. She hired a company to create fake social media profiles, paid for photo manipulation services to create compromising images, and even contracted with a marketing firm that specializes in reputation destruction. Gasps rippled through the crowd. This wasn't just sibling jealousy or a moment of poor judgment. This was a calculated, expensive, professional-level campaign of sabotage. But that's not all, I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Show them the communications with Blackwater Investigations. A new document appeared on screen. Email exchanges between Chelsea and a private investigation firm that specialized in what they euphemistically called relationship verification services. She hired a private investigator, Marcus read from the emails, not to investigate Ryan, but to help her create a convincing narrative of infidelity. The investigator was supposed to provide her with techniques for gathering evidence, suggestions for building a credible timeline, and advice on how to present her accusations for maximum emotional impact. The emails were damning. Chelsea's messages showed a level of premeditation that went far beyond anything I'd imagined. She'd researched Ryan's work schedule, mapped out his daily routines, and even identified potential witnesses who might be willing to corroborate false stories for the right price. My personal favorite, I said, unable to keep a note of bitter admiration out of my voice, is the email where she asks for advice on method acting techniques for sustained deception during family gatherings. The highlighted email appeared on screen, showing Chelsea's message. I need to maintain the performance for several months without anyone suspecting I'm lying. Are there professional techniques for staying in character during high-stress family interactions? The investigator's response was equally chilling. Practice your emotional responses in front of a mirror. Create backstory details that feel real to you, even if they're fictional. The key is to make yourself believe the lie so thoroughly that your reactions appear genuine. My mother was openly crying now, her hands pressed to her face as she stared at the evidence of her younger daughter's elaborate deception. My father looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past hour, his face gray with shock and disappointment. There's something else, Marcus continued, pulling up a new set of documents. Chelsea didn't just plan to ruin Allison's wedding, she had a comprehensive strategy for the aftermath. The screen showed a detailed timeline titled Post-Wedding Damage Control and Escalation Plan. It was laid out like a military operation, with phases, objectives, and contingency strategies. Phase 1, Marcus read aloud, was tonight's announcement. But she'd already planned Phase 2, a fake miscarriage that would generate sympathy and keep the story alive for months. The document showed Chelsea had researched support groups for pregnancy loss, planned to post about her grief on social media, and even identified specific family members who would be most likely to rally around her during her difficult time. Phase 3, I continued, was a harassment campaign designed to drive Ryan and me apart permanently. She was going to claim that losing our baby had traumatized her so badly that she couldn't bear to see us together. She planned to show up at our apartment, call Ryan at work, and create scenes at family gatherings until the stress destroyed our marriage. The room was completely silent, except for the sound of my mother's quiet sobs. Even the most dramatic soap opera couldn't have conceived of something this elaborate and malicious. But the most disturbing part, Marcus said, his voice taking on the grave tone he used for his most serious cases, is what she planned to do if the pregnancy lie didn't work. A new document appeared, a folder labeled Nuclear Option. Inside were detailed plans for filing false police reports against Ryan, creating fake evidence of domestic violence, and even forging medical records to support claims of assault. She was prepared to send an innocent man to prison, Marcus said, letting that statement hang in the air. She was willing to destroy not just a marriage, but Ryan's entire life, his career, his freedom, all to satisfy her need for revenge against her sister's happiness. Chelsea had stopped trying to defend herself. She stood at the microphone, swaying slightly, looking like she might collapse. The confident, radiant woman who'd made her announcement 20 minutes ago had been replaced by someone hollow-eyed and defeated. Why? The word came from my mother, broken and barely audible. Chelsea, why would you do this to your own sister? For a moment, I thought Chelsea wouldn't answer. Then she lifted her head and looked directly at me, and I saw something in her eyes that I'd never noticed before, a rage so deep and consuming that it twisted her into someone I didn't recognize. Because she has everything, Chelsea said, her voice flat and emotionless now. She's always had everything. The perfect grades in school while I struggled with dyslexia. The scholarship to college while I had to take out loans. The job that pays 6 figures while I can barely afford my rent. The parents who brag about her accomplishments while pretending I don't exist. She gestured wildly at the reception hall, at the elegant decorations and the designer dress I wore. And now this, the perfect man, the perfect wedding, the perfect life, while I'm 30 years old, single, living paycheck to paycheck, watching my little sister get everything I've ever wanted. So you decided to take it away from me, I said quietly. I decided to show everyone that perfect isn't real. Behind all your success and happiness, you're just as broken and pathetic as the rest of us. I wanted you to feel what it's like to lose everything, to have people look at you with pity instead of admiration. The honesty was more brutal than any lie she could have told. This wasn't about Ryan or pregnancy or infidelity. This was about a lifetime of resentment that had finally metastasized into something malignant and destructive. The difference between us, I said, stepping closer to her, is that when life got hard for me, I worked harder. When I faced setbacks, I found ways around them. When I felt jealous of someone else's success, I used it as motivation to improve my own life. I gestured to the screens still displaying evidence of her elaborate scheme. You chose to tear down instead of build up. You chose destruction over creation. You chose to become someone who could plan something this evil against her own family. Chelsea's face crumpled, but I wasn't finished. And now you have to live with the consequences. Two uniformed officers appeared at the entrance to the ballroom, moving with the quiet efficiency of people who'd been waiting for their cue. I'd asked them to remain in the lobby until I gave Marcus the signal, hoping we wouldn't need them, but knowing that someone who planned something this elaborate wouldn't go quietly. "Officers Rodriguez and Kim," Marcus announced to the room, "thank you for your patience." Chelsea's head snapped up, her eyes darting between the approaching officers and the exits like a trapped animal. "You called the police on your own sister?" "I called the police on someone who committed multiple felonies," I corrected. "The fact that we share DNA doesn't give you immunity from the law." Officer Rodriguez, a tall woman with graying hair and the bearing of someone who'd seen everything, stepped forward. "Miss Thompson, we need to speak with you about several serious charges." "This is harassment," Chelsea protested, backing away from the microphone. "I haven't done anything illegal." Officer Kim, a younger man with kind eyes but a firm voice, began reading from a document. "Identity theft through the creation of fraudulent social media accounts, cyberstalking and harassment, conspiracy to commit fraud, filing false reports with intent to damage reputation, and, based on the evidence we've reviewed, conspiracy to file false police reports." Each of these charges, Marcus added, addressing the stunned crowd as much as Chelsea, carries significant penalties. In New York State, identity theft alone can result in up to 7 years in prison. The weight of real consequences seemed to hit Chelsea all at once. The color drained from her face, and she grabbed onto a nearby chair for support. I didn't think. It wasn't supposed to go this far." "It went this far the moment you hired professionals to help you destroy an innocent person's life," Officer Rodriguez said firmly. "The financial records show premeditation, planning, and significant investment in criminal activity." My father finally stood up from the family table, his face a mixture of devastation and resolve. He'd been silent through most of this nightmare, but now he looked every inch the respected attorney who'd built his reputation on defending the truth. "Chelsea," he said, his voice heavy with disappointment, "I've spent 30 years in courtrooms, and I've never seen a more clear-cut case of malicious intent. What you've done isn't just illegal, it's unforgivable." "Daddy, please," Chelsea pleaded, the tough mask completely gone now, replaced by the little girl who'd always been able to manipulate him into fixing her problems. "I made a mistake. I was hurting, and I made a terrible mistake." "A mistake," my mother said, standing beside Dad with tears still streaming down her face, "is forgetting to return a phone call or saying something hurtful in anger. This was a 6-month campaign to destroy your sister's life. This was evil, Chelsea, pure, calculated evil." The words hit Chelsea like physical blows. She looked around the room desperately, searching for even one sympathetic face, but found none. Wedding guests who'd known her for years were looking at her with disgust and horror. Family members who'd always made excuses for her behavior were shaking their heads in disbelief. "The district attorney's office," Officer Kim continued, "has already reviewed the preliminary evidence and authorized us to proceed with arrests on multiple charges. Miss Thompson, you have the right to remain silent." As he began reading her Miranda rights, Chelsea's legs gave out. She collapsed into the chair she'd been gripping, her designer bridesmaid dress pooling around her like wilted flower petals. "Wait," she gasped, looking up at me with desperate eyes. "Allison, please, I'll do anything. I'll pay for the damages, I'll get therapy, I'll disappear from your life forever. Just don't let them arrest me, please. For a moment, I felt a flicker of the old dynamic. Chelsea in trouble, looking to me to save her, expecting me to clean up her mess like I'd done countless times throughout our childhood. The big sister who'd covered for her when she broke Mom's antique vase, who'd helped her cheat on her SATs, who'd lent her money she never paid back. But then I looked at Ryan, standing beside me with his hand on my back, offering silent support through this nightmare. I thought about the months of stress and doubt she'd planned to put us through. I thought about the fake police reports she'd been ready to file, the innocent man she'd been preparing to send to prison, the family she'd been willing to destroy for her own satisfaction. "The time for me to save you from consequences is over," I said quietly. "You're an adult, Chelsea. You made adult choices, and now you get to face adult consequences." Officer Rodriguez stepped forward with handcuffs, but Chelsea suddenly lunged toward me, her face twisted with rage and desperation. "This is all your fault," she screamed, her voice echoing off the marble walls. "If you weren't so perfect, if you didn't make everyone love you more, if you hadn't rubbed your happiness in my face—" Ryan moved between us, his construction-trained reflexes quick enough to intercept Chelsea before she could reach me. Officer Kim grabbed her arms, restraining her as she continued to rant. "You destroyed my life first," she sobbed, struggling against the officer's grip. "Every success you had was a reminder of my failures. Every time Mom and Dad bragged about you, it was like they were saying I wasn't good enough. I had to watch you get everything I wanted while I got nothing." "You got the same opportunities I did," I replied, my voice steady despite the emotional storm raging in front of me. "The same parents, the same education, the same support system. The difference is what we chose to do with those opportunities." The officers were moving Chelsea toward the exit now, but she twisted around for one last desperate plea. "The family business," she called out. "Dad, what about your law firm? If I have a criminal record, I can't work there anymore. I'll lose everything." My father's face hardened in a way I'd never seen before. "You lost your position at Thompson and Associates the moment you decided to commit felonies, Chelsea. I won't have my firm associated with someone who uses legal knowledge to plan criminal activities." The finality in his voice seemed to break something in Chelsea. She stopped struggling and went limp, letting the officers guide her out of the ballroom without further resistance. As the doors closed behind them, the reception hall fell into an eerie quiet. 300 guests sat in stunned silence, processing what they'd just witnessed. The wedding cake sat untouched on its table, the flower arrangements looked wilted under the harsh spotlight, and the fairy tale atmosphere had been completely shattered. But strangely, I felt lighter than I had in months. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus announced, his lawyer's training helping him navigate the awkward aftermath, "I know this evening has been unprecedented. The bride and groom will need some time to process what's happened, and I'm sure you all will too." Patricia, the wedding planner, stepped forward with the efficiency that had made her famous in the Albany event planning scene. "The bar will remain open for another hour for anyone who needs a drink after all this. Transportation can be arranged for those who need it." But before people could start filing out, my grandmother, my father's mother, who'd been silent through the entire ordeal, stood up with the help of her walker and began to clap. Slowly, one by one, the other guests joined her. Not the polite applause of a wedding reception, but the kind of slow, meaningful applause that acknowledges courage in the face of unthinkable betrayal. Ryan pulled me close, his arms wrapping around me like a shield against any remaining chaos. "Are you okay?" he whispered in my ear. "I will be," I whispered back. "We will be." Because for the first time in my life, Chelsea's actions would have real consequences, and for the first time in months, my future felt genuinely bright. 6 weeks later, I stood in the kitchen of our new house in Saratoga Springs, the one with the blue shutters and wraparound porch that had been part of Ryan's secret savings plan. The morning sun streamed through the windows as I watched him in the backyard, building raised garden beds for the vegetable garden we'd planned together. The house had been a wedding gift from my parents, though not in the way we'd originally expected. After Chelsea's arrest and the subsequent media attention that had made our family the subject of local news coverage, Mom and Dad had decided they needed to do something meaningful to show their support for our marriage and their horror at what Chelsea had done. "We failed as parents," Dad had told me during one of our long conversations in the weeks following the wedding. "We enabled her behavior for so long that we forgot there's a difference between loving someone and protecting them from consequences." The legal proceedings had moved swiftly. Chelsea's elaborate paper trail and digital evidence had made the district attorney's case almost effortless. She'd been convicted on 4 felony charges and sentenced to 3 years in prison, with an additional 2 years of probation and mandatory psychological counseling. The private investigator she'd hired, Blackwater Investigations, had also faced charges for their role in the scheme. It turned out that helping someone fabricate evidence of infidelity was illegal, regardless of how they'd tried to disguise it as relationship consulting. Their license had been revoked, and the owner was facing his own criminal charges. But perhaps the most satisfying consequence had been completely unplanned. The story of the wedding disaster had gone viral after several guests posted videos on social media. A true crime podcast had picked it up, then a network news magazine, and finally a streaming documentary series about family betrayal. Chelsea had wanted attention and drama. She'd certainly gotten both, just not in the way she'd intended. The irony, Marcus had told me during one of our follow-up meetings, is that she's succeeded in making herself famous. She's become a cautionary tale about what happens when jealousy and entitlement spiral completely out of control. The documentary had been particularly thorough, interviewing family members, analyzing the psychology behind sibling rivalry, and consulting with experts on manipulation and sociopathic behavior. Watching it had been surreal, seeing our private family dysfunction dissected by strangers, but also oddly healing. Dr. Sarah Kellerman, the forensic psychologist who'd been interviewed for the show, had explained that Chelsea's behavior fit a pattern she'd seen in her practice. When someone feels perpetually overshadowed by a family member, they sometimes develop what we call destructive competition syndrome. Rather than working to improve their own situation, they become obsessed with tearing down the other person's success. The expert had gone on to describe how this type of behavior often escalates over time, starting with small acts of sabotage and building elaborate schemes for destruction. What makes this case particularly disturbing, Dr. Kellerman had said, is the level of premeditation and the willingness to involve innocent third parties in the deception. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica, my college roommate who'd witnessed the entire wedding disaster. "Saw the documentary trailer? Are you ready for this to blow up all over again?" I smiled and typed back, "Bring it on. The truth deserves to be told." Because that was what this whole experience had taught me, that hiding from difficult truths only gives them more power over you. Chelsea had spent years nurturing her resentment in secret, letting it grow and fester until it consumed her completely. If we'd confronted the family dynamics earlier, if we'd refused to enable her victim mentality, maybe things could have been different. Ryan came inside, wiping dirt from his hands on an old t-shirt. "The tomato beds are finished," he announced, kissing my forehead, "ready for planting next weekend." "Perfect timing," I said, showing him my laptop screen. "I just got confirmation that the interview requests are finally slowing down. We might actually have a normal weekend for once." The media attention had been overwhelming at first. Everyone wanted to interview the bride who'd outsmarted her scheming sister, the husband who'd been falsely accused, the family torn apart by jealousy and lies. We'd been selective about which interviews to grant, wanting to control our own narrative instead of letting others define it for us. The strangest part had been the public reaction. Thousands of people had reached out to share their own stories of family betrayal, sibling rivalry, and toxic relationships. We'd received letters from women whose sisters had tried to steal their boyfriends, from men whose brothers had sabotaged their careers, from parents struggling to deal with one child's jealousy of another. One letter had read, What you did gave me the courage to finally set boundaries with my own family. I've been making excuses for my sister's behavior for 20 years, but watching your story made me realize that love doesn't mean accepting abuse. Those letters had made all the publicity worthwhile. If our nightmare could help other people recognize and escape similar situations, then some good had come from Chelsea's destructive choices. My mother had struggled the most with the aftermath. The guilt of having enabled Chelsea's behavior, combined with the grief of essentially losing a daughter, had sent her into therapy for the first time in her life. I kept telling myself I was being supportive, she'd confided during one of our weekly coffee dates, but really, I was just avoiding conflict. Every time Chelsea created drama, it was easier to smooth things over than to make her face consequences. I taught her that her actions didn't matter as long as she could manipulate people into feeling sorry for her. The family healing process had been slow but necessary. We'd all started individual counseling, and Mom and Dad had begun couples therapy to work through their guilt and disagreement about how they'd handled Chelsea over the years. Surprisingly, it was my grandmother who'd provided the most wisdom about the situation. At 92, she'd lived through enough family drama to have perspective that the rest of us lacked. Some people, she told me while we sat on her porch swing a month after the wedding, are just determined to be miserable. They'll find reasons to be unhappy no matter how blessed their lives are. Chelsea was born into a loving family with every advantage, but she chose to focus on what she didn't have instead of appreciating what she did. She'd patted my hand with her age-spotted fingers. You could have given her everything you accomplished, and she still would have found something to resent. That's not your burden to carry, sweetheart. That's hers. Now, as I watched Ryan arranging his gardening tools in our new shed, I felt the truth of those words settling into my bones. Chelsea's choices had never been about me or my success. They'd been about her own inability to find meaning and satisfaction in her own life. The doorbell rang, interrupting my reflection. Through the front window, I could see a delivery truck parked in our driveway. "Wedding gifts?" Ryan asked, coming back inside. "Probably," I laughed. "People are still sending them, even though the wedding was 6 weeks ago." But when I opened the door, the delivery man handed me a certified letter instead of a package. The return address made my stomach clench: New York State Department of Corrections. Ryan came up behind me as I opened it, his hand on my shoulder as I read the official notification that Chelsea was requesting permission to contact me from prison. "She wants to meet," I said quietly. "The letter says she has something she needs to say to me face to face." Ryan was silent for a moment, then asked, "What do you want to do?" I folded the letter and looked around our bright, peaceful kitchen. The morning sunlight, the smell of coffee, the plans we'd made for our garden and our future. This was the life Chelsea had tried to destroy, but instead, her actions had only made it stronger. "Nothing," I said finally. "I want to do absolutely nothing." Because the most powerful response to someone who tried to make themselves the center of my universe was to refuse to let them occupy any space in it at all. Chelsea had spent years of her life plotting my destruction. I wasn't going to waste another moment of mine thinking about hers. Ryan smiled and pulled me into his arms. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said, "I think that's the wisest decision you've ever made." Outside, a cardinal landed on our new fence post, bright red against the blue morning sky. A sign of new beginnings, my grandmother would have said. I chose to believe her. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.